Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go a little bit off the usual path and talk about this furnace. This is a Rheem residential furnace, and right now it's not working. When it calls for heat or cool, right now it's the middle of the summer, so it's going to be calling for cool. When it gets a signal for cool, this is what it does. That hum you hear is the electric motor trying to drive the fan, which is back in this housing here. If that motor is having a difficult time turning the fan, it will make that kind of a buzz noise. Nicely on this one, you can actually see the fan real easily right over here. So right here is the fan, and I can actually reach in and touch it here. So look what happens when I try to just push it. Make sure everything is off when you're doing this. But look, the fan does turn, so the bearing isn't seized, but when I push it, it stops moving almost as soon as I quit pushing. So something is giving it a whole bunch of resistance. It is probably a bad bearing or bushing in the motor. But we need to pull this thing out, figure out exactly what's wrong with it, and probably buy a new motor for it. Here's what it should look like when it's working properly. Notice I didn't push it hard at all, and it's still spinning. The fan is inside this fan housing, and removing it on this one appears to be really easy. We have a screw right there, and another one over on this side right there. And if you look back behind that screw, it looks like there are just some tabs that the whole carriage rides in. So I should be able to just pull those two screws out and pull the entire fan assembly forward. When we pull this fan carriage out, my suspicion is these wires are going to be too short for us to get it all the way out. But let's start and see what happens. Just use that nut driver as a 1/4 inch to take the two screws out. Now that we have those two screws out, we can just pull this. You can see at this point, these wires are getting in the way. I can't pull it any further, so we're going to have to disconnect some of them. Before you do any disconnects, I would highly recommend you take pictures or diagram at the very least where every wire that you pull off comes from. In my case, it's really just these two connectors, and then these, one goes to the thermostat and one goes to the compressor outside. It looks like this black and white wire, which is the 12-volt transformer, is just tied in right here, but I think it just wraps around, comes back to the board here, so I just need to cut this zip tie. It looks like this connector here has to be taken off, and I have another couple of wires here, black and white. These are 110. Okay, and again, just these controls. Looks like the flame sensor wire as well. Alright, so I can verify that all the wires that were connected, I can now completely pull aside. Now that I have it out, it's a little easier for me to show you how it's resisting turning, I guess. If I just mark one of these blades. Now if I give it a good push, it should rotate easily 10 times. But watch, if I give it a good push here, have we even seen it? Oh, didn't even get a full rotation in. So this is definitely not spinning the way it should. So the defective piece is this motor right here. So this is what we need to get out and replace. need to get it out so we can find out what the part number is. Because the squirrel cage here is inside this whole housing and I don't feel like taking it apart, I'm just going to loosen this lock screw here. It basically runs against the flat part of the motor shaft, so we're going to loosen that. And then remove the motor from over here. Alright, so we've got the fan out. Now let's take this band off of the outside of it. And really what we're after is this right here. This gives us all the information we need to know about the motor. So we can see here, it says it's a single phase, 60 hertz, 3/4 horsepower, 115 volt. I mean, it also says it's a 1080 RPM and 8.3 amps. But with this information, we can find one that matches it. This does have, looks like a Gen-Tech and a part number. The odds of us getting that exact part number are maybe harder, but if we know these pieces of information, we should be able to get one that is the same dimensions and has the same specifications. Again, take pictures of everything or at least diagram it before you take it apart. So the trick with these, it's not just a standard spade. It's got a little tab that you have to push in right here. If you pull on it, it doesn't move at all, but if you push that little tab in, something like a wrench, then they come right off. Some of them are harder because you can't see them. So it's this little tab right here. You push it with a wrench, kind of pushes it out of the way. So I'm just pushing it basically that direction. All right, motor came in. First thing you want to do is make sure it matches the original. This is the old one, this is the new one. These ones actually have the exact same part number, same manufacturer, so I know they're the same. Sometimes you don't get the exact same part number, but as long as the dimensions fit, outside dimension, shaft length, shaft diameter, but also make sure that those numbers on the data tag that we talked about earlier, the horsepower, RPMs, amps, all of that, make sure they match. These two, again, are identical. So we just have to put this one in. All right, next we need to put this and all of the legs on so that we can put it back in the housing. Put this usually away from the wires and make sure that the wires aren't going to interfere with the feet. Now go ahead and leave them a little bit loose. You want to be able to move it up and down still so you can adjust the depth of the motor in the housing. Alright, at this point you're probably going to want to have two people. You can do it by yourself, but it's way easier with two. You need to lift this up and hold it roughly centered. Then the motor needs to go in, put the shaft through the hole. You can try to align the flat spot on the shaft with the lock bolt in the squirrel cage. If you can't get it, don't worry too much about it. Make sure it's nice and loose so it's not fighting you. And make sure that the wires are toward this board so that they're not, getting stretched too far. Alright, once you have that in, now you want to lift it up and start the bolts in the top two. Alright, I have them hand tight. Now we want to get the squirrel cage centered and tighten the jam nut on it. So now hold this centered side to side so that we have it even. Over here, this ring that is holding the motor, you don't want it quite so far back on this. So I'm going to pull the motor back. So you want it pulled out here. Basically what we're trying to do is center the weight of this motor in the housing. So we pull it out some so that we don't have a lot sticking out here. Then we'll tighten this down. Again, making sure you're centered. And now we need to tighten down these mounts. Once you have that done, now we need to tighten this so that it's holding the motor tightly. Now, as you're tightening this, you need to make sure someone holds this up so that there's space. It needs to be centered so that as we tighten this, it's not rubbing here from gravity. And now verify that it's working, just so it's easier to see. Put a mark on there, and if I just push it lightly, you can see there's the third, there's the fourth, there's a 5. You can see it's still spinning nice and freely, way better than the one that we pulled out. The key while it's spinning is that you don't hear it dragging anywhere. It's just free in the air. If it's scraping on the sides, you need to adjust how you've got it mounted so that it's nice and centered and free spinning. All right, when we bring it back in, just going to take the flange on the top of that housing and it goes underneath that and slides all the way back. Then we just put our 2 retaining screws back in. One of them here somewhere. And now we just have to hook all the wires back up. That's why we took a picture before. All right, once you have everything hooked back up, do some wire management with some zip ties or the ties that were already here. And now you should be able to close it up and turn it on. Just to test, push this button here, which makes it think the cover is on, and flip the power switch. And there we go. It's repaired. Thanks for watching.